Hello, everyone. My name is Mike Geig, and welcome to another episode of Unity Behind the Game. Today, we are talking about Little Orpheus with the studio The Chinese Room, and I am joined by Nick Slaven and Dan Pinchbeck. How you guys doing?
Great, thanks.
Good, thank you. Yourself?
Oh, I'm doing all right. Thank you. Almost no one ever asks me. They always just say good, and then we just start. So I appreciate that. That's
I
quite
think when
nice.
you're running a studio, you spend a lot of time going, "Are you okay? Are you okay? Is everything okay?"
You don't look
Something of a
okay. Something's
reflex.
wrong.
You sure you're right?
You got that look in your eye. So talk about Little Orpheus. Before we get into the game, would like to just talk a little bit, about the studio at the Chinese Room. So how did you guys get started? How did you get to where you are today?
We started way back in 2007 it was actually a research project at university. I was doing a PhD in first-person shooters at the time, and there were sort of these kind of interesting questions that kind of were coming up, and I don't like theory very much, so I was like, we should just practically build these things and see if they work. So we did some stuff like we made a version of Doom 3 where we changed the shotgun so it only had rubber bullets so the zombies would get back up again, and all sorts of stuff. And one of them was we made a game called Dear Esther, which is basically just going, what if we took all the gameplay mechanics out and just left the story and the atmosphere? Is that something that people would still like? And they did. So we made a commercial version of it back in 2012. And then we became a game company. So we made a couple of games, including probably the title we're most known for is Everybody's Gone to the Rapture, which was a PS4 exclusive in 2015. And in 2018, we joined the Sumo Digital Family Studios. And really grew from being a very small indie to being a kind of like a mid-sized studio. Nick joined us at that point. I'm just going to sort of say where he's come from, and the rest of the team. And we pretty much started working on Little Orpheus virtually right on top of joining Sumo. It was really exciting to be kind of rebuilding and evolving a studio whilst on a project. So it's been quite a ride since then.
I'd imagine. Yeah. I also love the fact that you can get a PhD in first-person shooters, right? Like that's all. That's the dream, right?
There's the whole sort of like English thing of kind of like when someone shouts, "Is there a doctor in the house?" And kind of hoping at some point they'll be able to do that, and I'll be able to say, "Yeah, but only if you want to know walkthrough of Halo." No.
Brilliant.
As we're talking about this game, and we're going to get more into it and stuff like that, but before we do that, when we talked previously, I'd asked you kind of the origin of the name of your studio, and I thought it was a really cool story, so I figured I'd ask again. Like the Chinese Room seems like a very interesting name, so I'm very curious about that.
So it comes from an American philosopher, John Searle, who back in I think it was the 70s, came up with this thought experiment called the Chinese Room experiment to kind of prove that AI doesn't exist. And the idea is that if you have someone who doesn't speak kind of either Cantonese or Mandarin sitting in a perfectly airtight room, but just a hole under the door, you can pass bits of paper through, but they've got a perfect Cantonese or Mandarin to English dictionary and a perfect English to Cantonese or Mandarin dictionary. And someone outside the room could put messages under the door in either of Cantonese or Mandarin. They translate it into English, answer the question because they know how to answer the question in English, translate it back into the language and push it back under the door. And the person on the other side of the door would assume that they're a native language speaker inside the room, but they're not. And his argument is that's why AI doesn't work. A computer creates the impression that it's thinking, but of course it's not actually thinking. It's just looking things up in a book, which is rubbish and it doesn't really work. And it's been kind of convincingly debunked afterwards. But when we first started out, everyone was Dear Esther became very popular very, very quickly. And there was a lot of stuff floating around and, give us your take on this and about game stuff and this sort of thing. And really it was just a few of us sat around in a room kind of learning how to be game developers. And it just sort of felt like a bit of an apt metaphor for where we were at the time. And it sounded pretty cool. So we sort of got stuck with it. And it's seen us well up until that point. It keeps us quite recognizable, I suppose. It's a name that people tend to know. So it's doing its job.
It's one of the things that drew me to the studio actually, because I'm kind of quite like AI, and so the idea of something called the Chinese Room was immediately appealing and interesting to me. So it's one of the kind of had me bought into the studio right from the start, just from the name.
No, fair enough. I'm trying to avoid the natural urge to just let's just talk about AI some more because I love it as a topic, but that's certainly not why we're here.
Yeah, we could do AI for quite a long time, I think.
Indeed, you could.
Yeah, fair enough. So Little Orpheus, so tell us a bit about the game.
The game is a 2.5D Technicolor adventure platformer. It's very it's quite light, very casual friendly. It's not enormously challenging. It's designed for sort of like a family audience. Anyone can pick up and play it. And it is the story of a cosmonaut called Ivan Ivanovich, who is sent to the center of the Earth in the early 60s. It's been discovered that the Earth is hollow, and he's sent down there by the Soviet authorities to claim the center of the Earth for Soviet occupation. But because it's a one-way mission, they're not expecting anyone to come back. They don't send a hero. They send their worst cosmonaut who failed his entrance exams, cheated on his physical, and is generally a complete liability. And they basically strap him on top of an atomic bomb, which has got a big radio transmitter attached to it. And his job is to get dropped down a volcano, press a big red button so the homing beacon powered by the atomic bomb starts going off. And then they don't really care what happens to him. But he vanishes as soon as he disappears down, and they lose the bomb. There's great sort of consternation about the fact that there's an atomic bomb rolling around somewhere underneath Russia. And 3 years later, he reappears and claims he's been to the center of the Earth, and he's met dinosaurs, and he's saved the world, and he's gone to these fabulous lost cities. So he is dragged away to a cell deep below the mountains, and this sort of ferocious, huge general is brought in to interrogate him. And we start the game with the general sitting down opposite Ivan, and he basically just starts talking for his life. And it's this incredible Baron Munchausen tale, which he just spins as he's desperately trying to talk his way out of being sort of executed for treason. And we sort of play that. And the idea is that we are torn between kind of somewhere in our heads, knowing he's making the whole thing up as he goes along, but being absolutely desperate to believe him as well. And it's the story about how he and the general kind of win each other over as the night goes on. But you also get to play this extraordinary, fantastical kind of Ray Harryhausen adventure about kind of lost cities and wonderful civilizations and that sort of stuff.
Awesome. Yeah, I like the general, right? Yeah, I can't make you believe it, but I can have you shot. So it's just like that. All right, fair enough. So what sort of inspired like this kind of story, this sort of like journey to the center of the Earth sort of, tale?
I think it's partially, it's like it comes around again and again at this sort of that style of story where you go, it's just a good old fashioned romp. It's kind of, I think, so a few years ago, Jessica Curry, who's a composer on the project with Jim Fowler and used to run the company with me, and we're married, and we picked up like a DVD and we're looking at it for like our kid, and on the back of it, they have the little boxes which says contains sex, contains drug use, contains violence, contains stuff, and it said contains mild peril. And I was like, oh yeah, mild peril. Do you remember mild peril? Like the Goonies and kind of like Indiana Jones, where it was never that threatening and it was just a really good family-friendly adventure that was really exciting and really colourful, but it wasn't just this kind of grinding, rust-coloured sort of, it's got to be this kind of, again, I don't know, I've been playing a lot of very serious games, like I just can't disembowel one more person. I don't want to see another sort of like post-apocalyptic wasteland. I want a bit of colour and a bit of fun.
Forgotten in Raiders of the Lost Ark where the dude's face melts.
Well, apart from but it melts in Technicolor. It's sort of, it's pretty...
Fair enough. Claymation.
So there was partially that, and then going back to that kind of thing of going old-fashioned adventure stories like Jules Verne, and then I've always been really sort of interested in Russian fiction, particularly people like Boris and Arkady Strugatsky, who are like these Soviet-era sci-fi writers who wrote kind of a version of Harry Potter like 25 years before Harry Potter called Monday Begins on Saturday, and it's just really fun. And that sort of led me back through to some really, really early Russian sci-fi by a guy called Obruchev, who wrote basically an equivalent of Journey to the Center of the Earth, but it's kind of all ideologically correct. And it really made me just go, that's like a wonderful thing of kind of, there's this amazingly rich kind of world of science fiction, particularly early science fiction that was going on that we just don't know really very much about in the West at all. And I really wanted to do something with that. So that combination between, on one hand, kind of Indiana Jones, and then really sort of being interested in that sort of Russian science fiction, how that relates to culture. And then in that way that, just sort of sometimes happens, then even just sort of popped up in my head of going, well, rather than sending a sort of a square-jawed kind of space marine down there to sort it all out, it just seemed much funnier to send a kind of like massively dyspraxic, gangly, falls over his own feet liar, basically, who's just survived by, not through being this kind of like big epitome of what a Soviet space race hero is supposed to be, but just this kind of very, very quick-witted, very likable, very charming kind of normal person who was just going to probably just survivor. Yeah, early on we sort of said he's a rat in that way that you kind of like, rats are amazing animals. They'll survive whatever you throw at them, and there's something really admirable about that. So yeah, he kind of, as soon as he was there, then we were like, okay, we know who we're telling the story about. We know it doesn't really even matter what he does. If we get even right, and if we get the relationship, the general right, you'd listen to these two talk about, like, the two old guys in the Muppet Show up in the box. It should have that sort of vibe, and wouldn't that be a cool game to play, I guess?
Mm-hmm. Does anyone ever remember the name of those two old Muppets?
Stadler and Waldorf.
Man,
Yes.
so well done. You guys,
Excellent.
you can't win the podcast, but I'll give you points anyway. It was at least 5 points. That was fantastic. So this fantastical story, kind of humorous, gangly hero, all these things, very, very different from your previous games. Why
Just a
the
bit.
shift?
I mean, we definitely said when we joined Sumo that we wanted to evolve the studio, and we wanted to keep with the sort of kind of obsessive passion for world building and art and story, character, music, audio, all of those things. But we also wanted to look at applying that kind of, I guess, approach and focus to more traditional genres, like something that we weren't able to do as an indie, was to tackle sort of like bigger, more complex games. And you know, you have a tendency quite often in the studio. One of the things you have to be careful of, if you do something particularly well, people want you to do that thing over and over and over again. And I kind of get a little tired of doing that, and I wanted to do something different and really sort of change things and shake things up. And we'd done a mobile VR title before we joined Sumo, which was a sort of a kind of science fiction fairy tale, I guess. So we kind of already started moving towards things which were a little bit more colourful and things like that. And
What game was that?
it was called So Let Us Melt. It was on Daydream, so it was a fairly limited audience. But it kind of felt like as a first title to make, as the studios being part of Sumo, of saying, this is where we're going. I wanted us to do something which was different, to go, we're not just in the business of making sort of very deep, very, very serious, very, very slow games. We can do other things. You know, we're a studio that I want to be known for being exciting no matter what we apply ourselves to. Like, you always know you're going to get a good story. You always know it's going to look and sound beautiful. You always know it's going to be really interesting. It's going to be a bit different. And I'm really interested in studios like, say, Arcane, where what I love about Arcane is you turn on an Arcane game, you know it's an Arcane game in about 3 seconds flat. And it kind of, that's not sort of game, they just make this type of game. You just know it is. There's something about the DNA of that company that comes through. And for me, that feels like a really interesting place to be, rather than going, what kind of studio are you? We're a studio that basically make this game and we just make it over and over and over again. Just personally, because I don't want to do that. And I kind of felt like it would be nice to do something a little bit kind of fresher as well. And I suppose because I'm a writer, and it's quite unusual for a writer to be running a studio, so sort of as kind of like co-studio head, it means that there's very it is a little bit at the mercy of what I get obsessed with. Like, go, listen, I've had this great idea, let's all do this, and then kind of like sell it to everybody else in terms of what we're doing, which is nice, you know. And it is kind of, we talk about with the studio of saying, sort of, even as we're growing, we're about 45 people now, it's how do you preserve that kind of indie mentality, in terms of going, we want to do things that we're passionate about. We want the whole team to be passionate about it. We want everyone to feel like they've got ownership and buy-in, and they're really into what they're doing. Which I think is, you know, the aspiration of most studios, kind of have very, very similar goals. So yeah, it just felt like us kind of, I don't know, clearing our throats a little bit as a studio as well, and kind of going, just check this out. We haven't done this sort of thing before, but if we can do that well and we can do this well, we're kind of making an argument that whatever we do, we're gonna do it pretty well. But I imagine we'll be doing dark stuff again fairly soon as well, because that's also fun.
One of the things that I always like to drill into, right, is studios are making their games, they kind of have this target audience, this target player in their mind, right? And so if you had to describe the player that this game was for, like the player that would love this game, let's call this player Taylor, how would you describe Taylor?
I think this is a game for people that want to be told a really good story. I think it's what it's not is kind of Dark Souls, Bloodborne. This is for someone who goes, I want to be really, really challenged by the gameplay, and that's going to be, you know, sort of my thing. I think it is, even though weirdly, mainly because of kind of like COVID, it completely changed. We'd originally designed it to be episodic, so it was going to be 20-minute episodes, and we said it's commute friendly. It's the kind of thing where it's short enough that if like younger players can pick it up, and it's kind of like the length of a kind of a TV show, like kind of Battle of the Planets or those sort of old cartoons that I used to watch when I was a kid, or it's short enough that you can just dip into it if you're commuting, and it's just a bit of a fix of color and life and fun. And I think it's just that it's someone who basically goes, I want to be told a really good story, and one of the aspirations for it was going, we want to both tell the story and deliver the story in a way that actually feels more like a console game. That you kind of go, we're going to try and wedge a console, a game that wants to be a console game onto a mobile. And I think particularly in terms of stuff like the production values and stuff that went in, that certainly happened. But it was that sort of idea of going, yeah, this is something for people that just go, do you know, I just want to sit down and I want something that's going to make me laugh, that's going to make me feel good, and it's going to give me that sort of like nice buzz of a good old fashioned adventure as well.
So in terms of like sort of the technology, were you guys like using Unity throughout the entire development, or like how did you come about using Unity?
When I joined the studio, I was number 7 into the studio, and I was the first programmer on board there. I'd come from working almost exclusively in Unreal. I have used Unity before, but when I arrived, there was already some work underway from one of the studios that had been taken up with Unity. So there was a kind of a bit of time taken getting up to speed with Unity again. And my view on this is that they're both incredibly capable engines, and this one seems to fit quite well for what we wanted to do. So that was a natural choice. That said, we the whole mobile kind of aspect of it was kind of interesting as well, because we wanted to get this kind of console feeling game on a mobile, and I think mobile has been quite underrated. As a kind of platform in terms of its power and stuff like that. So we took the kind of decision early on to say, well, let's see how far we can push it, and then take it from there. Kind of like push it till the wheels fall off, and then work out how we put the wheels back on again. So is kind of the approach we took with that. So I think I probably strayed a little bit off your question here, but kind of like hoping to give you some kind of insight into our kind of thinking. But Unity has provided us with a very kind of nice kind of system to kind of work in the editor, and we were able to kind of work with the Unity remote as well. That was quite nice to be able to kind of play on the phone as we're kind of playing in the editor as well. So it's been quite useful. I think that's I've come to the natural end of what I was going to say there. So if you've got more questions on any technology, anything you wanted me to dig into, I mean, I could talk for a while on this, but something of interest to you would be kind of good to know.
Absolutely. Well, I one thing you had mentioned there, I will never shy away from discussing optimization and stuff, especially when it comes to mobile, right? So you say you want to push it as far as you can, and then put the wheels back on. Like, what were some of the things that you had to do to say optimize to get high frame rates and performance of a game sort of this involved on a mobile device?
So it comes down to shader complexity ultimately on the low end devices is what we found. There were a few other things that happen that if you're not ready for it can catch you out. So there are several kind of built-in things on the Apple devices that kind of protect them. So one of the things is thermal throttling. So if you are kind of pushing your GPU too hard, then you get heat kind of building up, and there's a kind of system on the device that goes, oh, hey, we're going to burn the phone out if we carry on doing this. So it automatically steps down the frame rate for you. You have no control over this from a software perspective. It's something that just happens. And so if you're stressing the hardware too much, then you've really got to kind of like look at the complexity of your scenes, all that sort of stuff, and then rein it in so that you don't get this thing happening. There are certain other kind of switches that you have to kind of consider. Most of this was done by our lead programmer, Louis Devet, who's been absolutely brilliant on this project. So I kind of have a kind of broad oversight on the things that they've been doing. But so there are some kind of switches that you can turn on to kind of stop some of the kind of almost continual kind of rendering that Unity will do. You can kind of sort of switch those off with some parameters to sort of say, well, okay, only update every so often, and then you give the time for the processor to kind of the GPU as well to kind of relax and cool down a wee bit before you send in the next batch of instructions. So there was that. Then the other thing is to consider is the memory footprint on the low end devices is quite tight. I think we had a kind of 4 GB max to kind of contend with on the size of the executable. And if your kind of game reaches around 69% of the available memory on the devices, then it will crash. It's another nanny process, I think, kicks in to sort of say, oh, hey, you're using up too much memory. You're not allowing me enough time to kind of act as the telephone if I need to. And kicks your application out.
Yeah, no, the thermal throttling gets a lot of people who have never developed for mobile, because they have their test devices and they run their game and they're like, it's great, getting high frame rates or whatever, and then over time their game is just not performing well.
That's the
you
thing.
gotta heat your devices up and then test it. Yeah,
yes, that's the thing.
throttling
It's something that doesn't happen until some way into the game. So you can do your quick test on it, say, yeah, this is all working fine, but after you've been playing for like 10 minutes, and suddenly the frame rate starts dropping, and you kind of have to get a handle on that. So there's some really nice tools on the Mac that you can use to kind of pick up these things. Profiling tools, profiling early is the thing. Profiling on real devices as early as you can is advice I'd give to anybody developing for mobile.
And profiling devices that have other apps installed that are also running.
Absolutely, yeah,
exactly. Yeah, it's a messy environment sometimes, but there's all these little gotchas. If you ever have it or anything else pops up, always love to just hear more about optimizations and stuff like that. It's one of those things you can never quite get enough of, because you could design the best mechanically, the best aesthetically game ever, but if it doesn't run, then it's not anything, right? And that's always the real crux of it, especially on your mobile platforms.
Oh, definitely. I think that's one of the things which is really kind of overlooked. Like so many games that you look at and you go, there's a really, really great game in here, but I can't get at it because it's just not functioning the way it should. And I think that's one of the things which we spent a long time on early on, sort of as well as this, in terms of like mechanically going on a game like this. Fundamentally, it's got to feel good to jump. It's got to feel good when you turn around. And we're very sort of inspired by Playdead's Inside and Limbo. I think they did the absolute sort of world beaters in terms of just moving around. The very simple acts of moving around in their games feel so good, and that's the gold standard you're aiming towards. And if you get that right, the pressure on a lot of the other parts of gameplay comes off. And if you get that wrong, it doesn't matter how amazing other bits of your gameplay are. And I think performance is in a really, really similar position, where you can put the most beautiful, amazing, gorgeous sounding thing on screen, but if the frame rate's tanking, then you've wasted your time.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah. You were going to say something, Nick?
I was going to say there's a couple of other things on optimizing for size as well. So we did a lot of stuff like stripping out shaders if we weren't going to use on particular devices. So and also things like making sure that the voice track is mono, because we're not going to hear it stereo sort of thing. Little things like that, really.
Oh, that's a good point too.
I think the other one, which was the designers had to cope with as well, which came sort of like, at a reasonably early stage, is that the ratios are different on different devices as well. Between sort of like iPads and iPhones, and suddenly going, hang on a sec, what screen size are we showing? Are we framing all of our mechanics properly in terms of those kind of things? But also in terms of performance, of going, if you're not testing it and profiling it on multiple ratio devices, then you're potentially going, well, it's actually fine because this is the stuff on screen at this point. And actually what you don't know is that there's something just happening just out of the visible range, because if it was re-ratioed to another device, it would be on there. So, when Nick says, well, I think we had probably about sort of like 12, 13 different devices we were running, profiling and testing on simultaneously, and switching those around as well. So someone had got very, very used to testing it on an iPhone 8, then they would get rotated around to an ITV. And if they were on a Mac, then they get rotated around to a sort of an iPhone 6. So you were constantly being kind of like refreshed in terms of what it was you were looking at. You couldn't make assumptions about how you thought it ought to be running.
Right. Awesome. So speaking of shaders and some of the graphical stuff that you guys had just mentioned, one of the things that we kind of noticed throughout was sort of this, and you even said it earlier, this sort of Technicolor aesthetic, you kind of got the CRT monitor effect in some areas, and then just sort of this very vibrant, saturated coloring and stuff. Like, what was maybe the reasoning behind that, or just sort of the look and feel you guys were going for?
Well, we definitely wanted to. I mean, another sort of one of the inspirations for it was the Old Republic serials like King of the Rocket Men and Undersea Kingdom from the 30s. And obviously they're sort of black and white. There's kind of like a kind of a hokiness to it. Like in Undersea Kingdom, there's like the kind of evil robots of Atlantis, and you can tell it's guys wearing cardboard boxes with kind of Hoover tube arms and legs, and they're kind of like futuristic vehicles. Someone's just like screwed a bunch of plywood onto a kind of like a normal sedan car, but there's something really charming about it. And obviously, you know, sort of we're British, so Doctor Who, and kind of like, you know, we're going to run around the same quarry in Suffolk for the entire of the 1970s, and actually everywhere. That sort of like naivety we really, really wanted to capture. And also because we're not playing a real space, we're playing Ivan's story, and that was very important aesthetically. Going, none of what we're doing is the rule of can we put it in the game or not, sort of in terms of storytelling artistic, was if Ivan can imagine it, it goes in. So there can't be anything in there that comes from a frame of reference that we can't say that Ivan could have had. So if he hasn't seen it or experienced it or thought of it, it can't go in the game. And that was there. But if it's in there, we're talking about this guy's got this huge imagination, and he's talking, like I said, everything's going to be exaggerated, everything's going to be huge. And so the combination between trying to capture that sort of kind of naive retro kind of vibe where it kind of looks a little bit like things are made out of polystyrene, things like with the Tyrannosaurus Rex, when Tim, our character artist, made it, the scales are way too big, and the idea was to make it look a little bit like a toy. So even though it's moving, the animation is quite kind of contemporary, because we'd originally played with like stop motion animation and stuff like that, but it just looked like the game was breaking and stuttering. It was really interesting. It was so hard to do. But even though it's got that sort of contemporary, very smooth animation, visually, it kind of looks like a rubber dinosaur. And so we're definitely trying to sort of capture that sense of this is retro, this is leaning back to Harryhausen, this is leaning back to that kind of idealism of pre-CGI, I suppose.
Nick, what were you going to say?
I was going to say, if we stayed with the stop motion effects, then people would have thought our animations were bad, you know. And then there's that kind of qualitative kind of assessment people make on those things.
It's always amazing the things that don't translate, right? Because stop motion is something that we all are super familiar with and grew up with, and it's this animation technique that's been around forever. But for whatever reason, when it's in games, it just doesn't make any sense. It just doesn't translate. Yeah.
We looked at things like as well, like you know, could we very early on, some of the sort of like the tests that John McCormack, our art director, and his team were doing, was things like saying, can we make this look like bad blue screening? Can we have the characters popping out of the environment like it's not real? And with the vistas in the background, like in the first episode, where you've got the amazing kind of vista of saying, let's not try and blend this in. That can look like a painting. It can look like an old matte painting. And some of those things went in, and some of them, like you say, just didn't work and had to come out like the blue screening type stuff. But I think what we ended up with zeroing in on was going, we're not trying to, because in terms of the world we're presenting, we're not representing reality. We're telling a story about a story. So you can kind of let the handbrake off a little bit and go, well, why can't our Mienk, our sort of like underground troglodytes, why can't they be bright blue? It doesn't matter. And like the Morlocks were bright blue in the sort of 60s version of Time Machine. Let's kind of not be sort of worry about being realistic about it, because it kind of clashes with the story that we're telling. And we should be able to just go, well, if it sounds good, if Ivan thinks it's going to get the general on side, then go for it. And I think little things like the Tyrannosaurus, it changes size throughout the episode as well. And we're like, we should be able to do that, you know. And it doesn't really, there's no consistency to any of the story, which is a really hard thing to try and get in the game, of going, can we have something where there's no consistency to the story, but then will the player see that as being inconsistent and they just won't get it? So it's this
versus constant, a bad design choice or something.
Yeah. So there's a lot of, it's one of those titles which I think is something that I've always thought like TCR titles do quite a lot, and it's a testament to the development teams on them. There's quite a lot of subtle, complex stuff going on, even though it feels quite, and if you do your job really, really well, it feels pretty simple, and it should feel slick and simple. But it's a lot of very sort of like fine-tuned balancing acts going on in terms of that stuff in there.
Actually, so were there any instances where you had planned some content and then you're like, caught yourself and went, oh wait, no, Ivan wouldn't know about that, or wouldn't have that frame of reference, or you know what I mean, or even started development on it and just went, wait a minute, anything like that?
I think we had to make, you know, we sort of, as the game was going along, we did quite a lot of cuts. I mean, the original episodes were coming out about 45 minutes long, and there was just so much in them. So after we'd made sort of like about 2 or 3 of those, and we're looking at it going, it's just not going to work. You can't sustain these episodes. They need to be about 20 minutes. That's the kind of the ideal length. So quite a lot of content was culled anyway. And that kind of gave us an opportunity to really go, okay, what's the stuff we really want to get in here? What are the set pieces that we think are going to be really going to fly, going to be really fun? When you're sort of writing it, you are sort of questioning yourself and going, does this fit the kind of the fictional world that we're presenting? And there's great opportunities when that fictional world is as sort of chaotic and larger in life as this one. But you also have to be really careful with consistency. So you're kind of going, we can have Ivan swallowed by a whale, but that it's got to feel like actually what happens within that is okay. So years and years ago, Jess and I had a friend of ours came to go and stay, and we ended up watching whichever Jurassic Park it is, I think 3, really quite late at night after a few bottles of wine. And like, there's a bit where the guy's got the satellite phone, is eaten by the Spinosaurus, I think it is. And then right near the end of the film, when there's no hope at all, they find this massive pile of Spinosaurus poo, and they hear the phone ringing inside it, and he sticks his arm in, pulls out the phone. And we kind of went, oh, it's just ridiculous. What's that? It's not what. It just so happens that they find that particular Spinosaurus poo. And this friend who was staying with Randy went, what, you're prepared to accept dinosaurs on an island, but you're not prepared to accept that. And it was a really kind of interesting moment of going, yeah, you've got to, really respect the player's sort of sense of continuity. So it was more about that sort of stuff of going, does this feel like a story that Ivan would tell, rather than would he know about this? And I think particularly towards the end of the game where the general starts joining in and starts feeding his own ideas. And I think it's where it gets really interesting, because you kind of start getting stuff in there where you can almost feel the general's influence in the world and the story that's being told. You can tell when, sort of as Ivan panics, the world starts breaking up and it becomes less consistent and things like that. And I think those little subtleties is stuff which is always really great when you can get that sort of stuff in, and it gets a bit beyond the sort of the first line of attack, if you like, of what you do.
Sure. So you had mentioned just now, like trimming out, some of the stuff to reduce down the time, and something Nick had said earlier, I believe, was about like kind of rebuilding teams and stuff like that. And one of the things was we talked, even before recording this today, that you guys were trying to like sort of build a team while kind of building this game. Can you tell us a little bit about that process?
Okay, it was very busy for us. So we were kind of like spent 50% of our time. It seemed like 50% of our time recruiting, whilst 50% the other 50% trying to get the game done, sort of thing. So we've made some really, really good hires actually, and they came on board some 3 or 4 months after we started. So we had like 3 or 4 months worth of development before the programming team really ramped up to where it should be. So we had a few kind of assists, I guess you'd call it, from the design team. They'd kind of jump in and help us out with some of the coding effort there. So we kind of changed hats a little bit there. I can't really talk much about the art team. They seem to kind of ramp up quite a lot quicker than we did. So they'd be I think by the time we got to the summer, we'd gone from the 7 when I joined to somewhere in the mid 30s. I think, was it low 30s?
Yeah,
of the studio size. But it was incredibly vibrant. Everyone's come on and been super enthusiastic, and has really, and that kind of early kind of part of formation of a studio has brought a lot of energy with it. And I think that kind of shows in the game that we've got. It's kind of a lot of kind of enthusiasm, energy has been put into it. But it was very busy. That's all I can really say. Ultimately, it was incredibly busy. It was just very steep and very, very, very busy. And I kind of think I'm really proud of what we've actually achieved with it.
And then either during then, something you had mentioned before, either during then or just or slightly afterwards, something about rescoping and caused like sort of a loss of a bunch of work.
Yeah, we rescoped the game partway through, where you kind of I think it's an inevitable part of development, where you hit a point and you're making it, and you're constantly doing that sort of course correction on, is this the best thing it can be, and how can this be the best thing it can be? And there's a real sort of a definite, I guess it's quite seductive to go, we're just going to keep throwing content into this thing because more's better, right? And then at some point you kind of sit back and you go, well, actually the real sort of like strength of it is going, that bit and that bit and that bit, they're all really good. So I think almost on every project I've been involved in. And I think, a lot of developers would probably say this on the games that you're really, really proud of and really go, this one did really well, are the ones where you skim the top of the mountain range and you go, regardless of how much we've got, regardless of where we are, actually, now we understand, we've been in development long enough to understand where the high watermark is. Now we've got to go back across the project, pick all those highlights off, and then look at the stuff which was good 6 months ago, but we've surpassed now. And that's just got to go. You've got to get that out of the game if you really want to have a really tight experience. And it's challenging, and it's not always easy. And sometimes it can be very, very painful. You have to get very used to going.
Attached.
Oh, totally. There was an episode that we cut, and we cut several episodes, but we cut an entire episode that we'd grey boxed. And I was really attached to it. I thought it was great. I thought it was a really, really good part of the story. And at the time, I was really, I'm quite, I don't know, Nick's going to shake his head furiously. I'm fairly mild-mannered as a creative director. I really lost it when this one went. I was like fighting really hard, going, it's going to ruin the game. You can't get rid of this. This is my story arc and this dramatic thing. And then we got rid of it. And then after about a week, I kind of went, that was completely the right decision. Fair enough. Let's move on. And I think it's kind of, you should fight hard. I mean, it's that whole thing, isn't it, with the sort of like hang on tightly, let go lightly. You should fight hard for the stuff you believe in, but you also have to be looking at stuff and being very objectively critical and going, if it's not, you have to, during development, one of your jobs is to constantly be moving the quality bar upwards whilst kind of not being unrealistic about what can be achieved. And you've got to be in a position where you're saying, if you're moving that quality bar consistently upwards, stuff is going to fall off the bottom. And that's a natural and inevitable thing. And clinging onto it too tightly, you're going to end up with a game that's got padding in it and weak points, and no one wants that. So it's not really good for the player, but it's also not good for the development team. If you're looking at stuff and you're going, we've got to ship this. I mean, I don't know a single developer who's ever shipped a single game who doesn't look at that game and go, I wish X, Y, Z wasn't in it. We could have done this better. We could have done that better. But you want to try and minimize that, and you certainly don't want a team heading towards launch going, do you know what? I can sort of feel this game is not where it ought to be. It's a terrible thing to inflict on someone, I think.
Yeah, I think even from a content standpoint, you even have like parts that just have old code, built in old ways, and you either have the option of rebuilding them or potentially having a maintenance liability.
Completely, yeah. And you learn so much. You learn. It's why I think as Nick sort of said, building a studio at the same time as building a game, it's really difficult. There's a lot of pressure attached to it, particularly for leads. It's very hard. But what it also does is it gives a real focus to things in terms of people are learning by doing. And I think that's really important, and they're able to see the results of their learning. But it does also mean that it's inevitable, that kind of like rising of quality, because people are simply more proficient with the technology 6 months after they start using it, or in your specific, the specific way that you're using that engine, which is going to be different potentially from the way they've used that engine before. So yeah, you have to really embrace that and not be frightened of it, even if it's tough.
Yes, I totally agree with that. And we learned so much in developing Little Orpheus about the right and wrong ways of doing animation. So we started off with one particular approach, and then some way into development decided that I had to make a hard choice to kind of switch over to using blend trees instead of the kind of more traditional animation stuff, and that was a big kind of turnaround. But we allowed the people the space to do that, really. So we didn't sort of say, well, now we technology is in place, we've got this deadline to meet and we're going to march towards that. We had to kind of reassess it because we weren't getting the quality out of what we wanted, of the way we were using animation system. By just turning that around and reworking all the animations, we got to where we wanted to be. But that did have an impact on other things as well. So as Dan was saying, working out what content fits and what we couldn't take forward was kind of the tough decisions from that.
Yeah.
I think one of the things which is one of the really real arts of production planning and scheduling is you have to somehow build into a schedule, and you're looking at it and going, okay, but where's the time to fail in this? That you're going to fail. There's going to be at least one area where you're going to have to go, not we could have done it better, or not this was go, okay, that just didn't work. We've got to write that time off, and we know there will be some time we will have to write off, but we'll have learned from it. It's not wasted, but it's not going to drive things forward. How do you build that stuff into a schedule? Because you can't predict where it's going to be. It's extremely likely it's going to happen. I think most projects run into something where they go, like, in the animation, they just turn around and go, do you know what? We've got to bite the bullet. We're going to have to rebuild a load of stuff. but we're just going about this the wrong way. And we've learned enough to know that we have failed in this regard. And how you adapt to that, and how you sort of like plan for that and schedule for that, particularly as you go sort of like further and further on a project and the dependencies and the consequences start piling up. And for me, that's where, you know, great project managers, great producers are so kind of important and so powerful, because they've got the kind of skills and expertise to go, while you're sort of like got your head to the coalface trying to sort of like really sort of push this thing through, they've got that ability to go, do you know what, I think we've got to start steering the ship now, because in about 3 weeks time it's going to need to change direction, and I don't want to get I'm just going to do that. And by the time, if that's done really, really well as a development team, you're kind of already being course corrected almost without feeling it, because that buffer and that time and that support structure for you to be able to learn from your mistakes is built in there. And it's something which is, you know, still I don't think is talked about a lot. We sort of tend to focus on kind of like the sort of like the heroines and heroes of game development. This looks great, that sounds great, game directors and stuff like that. And I'm always like, no, go back to the managers, go back to the admin staff and the sort of like the project planners and stuff like that who keep this stuff live, because that's the foundation, the bedrock that all the things we do works on.
Absolutely, that's important. That's important to be able to make those mid-course corrections and to plan for some time where you have to redo stuff. And one of the things I was going to say just a moment ago, before I was so rudely interrupted. One of the things I was going to say is I don't think people generally realize how many animations go into a game like this 2D, like you know, Little Orpheus, or like your Inside or Limbo or whatever, like just the hundreds of little transitions. I mean, everyone's like idle and walk and run and jump, but like there's like different levels of falling, and jumping is just falling that you meant to do, and you know that caps out. And there's all the like when you turn and your inertial shifts and things like that. Like all of those things are so important that it's incredibly difficult. And I would hopefully the folks listening to take anything away from this just be like, oh, wait a minute. Oh yeah, it's hard.
The animation count in Orpheus is somewhere, I think it's several hundred is what I would put it at. I can't remember the actual figure off the top of my head. I know we had a big spreadsheet with all the different things we needed in there, and it was hundreds and hundreds of different animations.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah. I think it's one of those things that when sort of like, you know, if people kind of go, oh yeah, but how hard can it be about game development? I think they should be given the choice of multiplayer server management, or trying to make sure that feet and arms connect properly with ledges during jump sequences, and they should just be locked in a room and not allowed out until they cracked it, and then they'll never say it again. Because it's that sort of stuff. But again, it's that minutiae, it's that polish which makes the difference. When you're going, like, you know, we're looking at it in terms of developing, and you're going, if I can see daylight between the hand when it connects with that branch and when it pulls up, we've just got to go again. And it's so difficult to get right. It takes so much iteration to get right, but it's largely completely unnoticed if you do it right. And it's where I think, like I say, great game teams make games look a lot simpler than they are. Usually the slicker and simpler the game looks, the more there is going on under the hood to make sure it's happened.
Come back on the animation thing. That's one thing where the new technologies in Unity really helped us out. So we were kind of working with the, I suppose you'd call it the older pipeline now, but it's the animation pipeline that we've got with the version of Unity we're using. So we had a Unity dev day that we went to, and they were telling about this really funky new feature called Runtime Rigging, and I saw that and thought, this is what we need to get Ivan's hands matching on the mantling points and all that sort of stuff. So we brought that back, and we adopted it straight away, even though it's I think it was a pre-release sort of feature, but we had reassurances that it would be good for when we release. So we went with that, and that solved a lot of our problems actually. Yeah, so the feet now match the floor, and the hands now match the mantles. And the dinosaur now eats Ivan wherever he goes on the level, sort of thing. So yeah, that's.
And I know the team that runs the dev day, so I'll let them know that it was helpful.
Really useful to kind of get those kind of insights of new technologies as they're coming down
fantastic
the road.
Yeah, no, the runtime rigging stuff is it's just super cool. Like all the stuff that you could do, and you're right, that the polish that enables you to do. You know, as you were saying, the simplest games are the hardest. It's like the old adage, like, sorry, my letter is so long, I didn't have time to make it shorter, right? Like, simplicity is incredibly complex. And there's so many little things, too, that the players will blame you for, even when it's their fault if it's not done right. Like, you know, especially with platformers, where if they step over the edge and then they jump, they fall because it's their fault. But they don't see that as their fault. They see that as I jumped on time. It's not my fault. It's your fault. You know, there's all these little things you have to add in there to just help them not be bad at the game.
You're trying to sort of deal with a wide range of players, between players who really, really want to be challenged and players who really just want to have a seamless experience. And it's very difficult to satisfy both of those things. So the sort of assistive systems you're putting in to make it kind of family, more casual friendly, are kind of exactly the systems which are going to completely irritate kind of like someone who's a hardcore, I don't want to be helped, I just want to do it. So it's a real balancing act. I think you kind of have to, I guess it's easier with a game like Orpheus, because it is what it is to such a sort of extent. You can kind of go, this is a game which is just this, and it's not Bloodborne. It's not about being exactly, it's just stick it on, listen to it, enjoy the story, get swept along. It's never going to challenge you too much. It's not The Witness. You're not going to kind of like cook your brain trying to figure it out. It's just a fun,
it's the experience,
diverting kind of romp way to go through it. And so in a way you can kind of go, so it's not going to have that. It is going to be pretty straightforward in that. But yeah, I think I haven't ever made a game with multiple difficulty levels yet. So it's something which I've yet in my career to tackle, but I have the respect I have for people, for the games that sort of like pull it off effectively, because balancing such a wide remit of players, that's hard. That's really tough design challenge.
I bet. So I have a few more questions here as we start kind of wrapping up a bit. One thing that I'd definitely like to hear from both of you is, what are you most proud of about this game?
To get to the end of development and everybody was still buoyant and happy and really enthusiastic about the game that they were making is something that was incredibly refreshing and good to see. So many times you get to end of development and it's you're kind of hating the thing that you're developing because you just want to get it out the door.
I've been there.
This wasn't like that at all. We were still kind of really kind of buoyed up by the whole thing, and so I'm proud of that. Proud of the teamwork that we had there. Proud of what the team has produced as well. It looks amazing and it plays really well. So
yeah, I'd second that. I think it's the team. I think there's a really genuinely lovely, supportive, inclusive, diverse, happy bunch of people who make games together. And they're a really, really nice crowd, and they're very, very talented, and they throw their all at what we do. And yeah, I'm really, really proud to be able to work with them. And I think to get this game out as well during lockdown. I mean, we went into lockdown, 5 months before the game came out, and they took it in their stride, and it came out the other end. And I just think it's a remarkable achievement that they all should be really applauded for, along with any other developer, frankly, who shipped something. As a developer who shipped something during lockdown, I think if you're out there listening to this and you're a game developer and you're still working during lockdown, let alone getting a game out the door during lockdown, then kudos, because you're doing a really, really cracking job.
Sure. So something I had learned about recently, and I wanted to make sure that we had plenty of time for you guys to talk a little bit about, is about this sort of diversity inclusion initiative at the Chinese Room. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so we so it's something that we've been sort of, I think, in this right back through the studio's history, it's something that we've been really sort of passionate about, and we've tried to be sort of a force for inclusion and diversity in the industry in the way we can. And it's something that was, it's really good to be part of Sumo, who have a whole series of different diversity and inclusion initiatives in the pipelines, from sort of like mentoring, championing, groups within the family of studios that do sort of like advocacy and look at the systems that we use and how we can sort of make those as properly diverse and inclusive as possible. And one of the things that we really wanted to do was to do an internship that we wanted to target at underrepresented groups in the industry. So whether that's women, LGBTQ+, people from BAME backgrounds, working families, carers, people from low income or working class backgrounds where they might not have formal qualifications, even people that might be trying to retrain. And sort of, I'm 47, so the idea now of me joining a different industry is virtually impossible. Like, how do you get people around from that thing? So we came up with a scheme where it would be 2 placements for 6 months, and we'd keep it fairly informal in terms of somebody who's going to be placed in design, somebody who's going to be placed in production. Anyone that came to us that felt like they were sort of like in the sort of like the code area. There's another amazing project going on within Sumo called Academy about retraining programmers for game coding. We could put them over in that direction. And we just thought we'll see what happens if we sort of like put this out and say we want to pay people. It's really, really important. And we basically want to get people that first step into a studio, which is often the hardest. And particularly, if you're coming from sort of like a slightly different background, is incredibly difficult. And we sort of like put it out on Twitter that we were doing it and everything else. And we got, I think it was just over 560 applications in about 3 weeks. So we were absolutely snowballed. And the quality of people was incredibly difficult. And to actually go, probably half the people that have applied, they all seem to be, they could probably slot into junior positions, let alone kind of internship. There's so much talent out there. So our 2 interns are starting with us at the end of this month. Really, really excited. We think they're fantastic. There's an amazing shortlist behind them of people we spoke to that were all amazing as well. And really, I suppose what we're kind of hoping is, if it works, then we'll have 2 people that are ready for a junior position, hopefully with us, if not us, somewhere within studio, if not somewhere within Sumo. If not, if they can get a job in the industry as a junior, then that's a tick, we've won. And that means that we can sort of go, this is worth doing. And there is this incredible talent out there if we look in slightly different ways for it. And then hopefully, then we can run the internship again, because we're bringing juniors in through a slightly different non-conventional route. But also it'll maybe sort of be something that sort of, will show that this is something worth doing. And I mean, we're by no means, there's a lot of studios out there that have amazing sort of like initiatives and have done for many years in terms of doing this. And there is definitely the sort of, that groundswell, which really started a few years ago, of going, we just need to be better as an industry. It's not going away, and the industry sort of is changing. More and more people are coming in. I think particularly people from underrepresented groups are gradually filtering up to leadership positions, and that's something that I feel very passionate about. We need to see more people from diverse backgrounds in senior roles, in lead roles, in principal roles, in studio leadership roles.
But it starts by seeding.
I'm really proud. Right? Yeah, completely. And I'm sort of very proud that, at Sumo we have Harinder, who is running Sumo Leamington, Darren, who's running Atom Hawk, that we have 2 sort of like people that are coming from a BAME background, or women, they can look at them and go, I can run a game studio because they're running a game studio. And I think that sort of visibility is hugely important, as much as initiatives that are bringing people at an early level into it. So I think mentoring, support, making sure that people are visible in terms of promotion, those kind of things. And, the systems that we have in place in Sumo for ensuring that is happening, that people at all levels of their career are able to progress and able to sort of understand where they are. I think these are really, really important. You can probably tell I'm like as passionate about this as making games. I'm going to talk about games. We're talking about inclusion and diversity. Because it just feels like it's for me, it's like, well, there doesn't really need to be any more evidence out there in the world that the more diverse voices exist on your team, the more creative your team becomes, the better stuff you make. So it's really sort of wonderful to be part of a studio that I think those values are really embedded right throughout what we do, and that's hugely important to me.
Awesome. That's amazing, right? It's, as you had said, the diversity just increases creativity through and through. So it's really awesome to hear. Hard transition back to Little Orpheus there, but like I said, I wanted to make sure to get that message out there so people knew this is something you were doing, because it's really important, right? There was a time some time ago when everyone in the video game industry came from a non-video game industry background, because there was no video game industry background. Like, you went to school for it, but there didn't used to be school for it. And so, yeah, everyone was sort of non-traditional at the time. So it's important, right? And it's kind of where we all came from anyway. So, yeah. So last kind of bit here about a Little Orpheus, right? So one, I understand there's some new content coming out, and 2, where's everyone going to find this?
So Orpheus will be remaining on Apple Arcade. It's the sort of the home where we're at. We are, in a kind of like the good old Cold War traditions, we can neither confirm nor deny that it's worth keeping an eye on Apple Arcade for some. There's a lot of when Ivan's missing for 3 years before he makes it back up to the surface, which was quite a deliberate part of the story, and we probably tell, I think, about 3.5 months of that time is covered. So we've got loads and loads. There's so many adventures for Ivan to kind of do. But we're moving out of the cell, and we're kind of like his life is continuing. There's some surprises. There's some new friends, some old friends. who are probably going to stop by for a visit. And I think what's really exciting about it, it's been a chance as well to really reflect on the game, to look at it, look at the things that we think work really, really well in the game, look at some new gameplay that's going in there. I think one of the I think the story goes to somewhere which to me is it's a real sort of like highlight in terms of the tall tale which we have planned, which we'd like to present to people. Is it makes getting swallowed by a whale look like walking to the shops, really. He's outdone himself in terms of his story on this one.
You can neither confirm nor deny it's worth keeping an eye on Apple Arcade, but
yeah, that sounds pretty good.
Yeah, just it is what it is, right? Just exactly. So then, last question here. What's next for the Chinese room?
So we're ready. Well, we're busy.
Yeah. We're still busy. We're still very, very busy.
Still very much busy. We're still growing. Still, people are still joining us. We are hard at work on unconfirmed stuff that I'm hoping at some point in the not too distant future we'll be able to talk about. But we're at that top secret in the bunker, peering out from underneath the blanket stage of production at the moment, where we snarl at anyone that gets too close, and then we sort of like mutter in corners and keep tinkering away with what we're doing. What I would say is the stuff that's being worked on is really, really, really exciting. It's, I think I think we're all very much looking forward to getting back into the studio with each other. We're really hoping that will happen next year, because we've now spent a year developing projects sort of apart and remote. I think everyone's really, really keen to meet each other. I mean, there's I think 8 or 9 people who now work for the Chinese room that I've never met. I know I've seen their faces on video, but we've never been in the same place physically. So I think really looking forward to that. But yeah, we've got some very, very exciting projects in the works that hopefully sort of next year we'll be letting people know a little bit more about.
Right on. Well, again, the game has been Little Orpheus, talking here with the Chinese room, Nick and Dan. So thank you guys so very much for taking the time to chat with us. It's been great.
Thank you. It's been great.
Thank you.
Very fun.
Fantastic. All right. Well, you all have a great day.